Chapter 9, in which a linen apron is made for gardening. Gardening is a messy hobby, yet there is nothing quite as healing for one's soul as digging in the dirt, with the smell of the good, clean earth and fresh things growing, as Dicken tells Mary in the secret garden. So I've planned to make myself a nice, roomy apron with big pockets to throw on over my clothes anytime I want to step out into the garden for just a bit of work. I've chosen a soft denim blue linen which has been pre-washed. And now to begin the drafting process. First, I need to know how wide my fabric is, so I know how much width I can get all around. I measure my hips, and I give myself a bit of room because I want this to be oversized and flowing. I've drafted out my pattern, and now I'm cutting it out. But there's nothing quite as satisfying as this. So the design I've chosen is going to be a cross back apron. There will be no ties, and then I want the front to gather into a narrow yoke at the top. I've started out with a shape like this. What I did is I measured across my bust to see how wide it was, so I made sure to cover enough of the front of me. I measured how long I wanted it to be, and I added a curve to the hem on the corners, but later changed that. There's several things that I changed this as I went along, and you'll see that as we go. So now I'm just going to hold it up, make sure that it's really the right length, that the curve under the arms reaches where I want it to, that it reaches across in the back all the way. It's an apron. No need to make a mock-up. The pattern itself is good. So now I'm going to work on drafting a pocket. I want it to fit my hand comfortably and any other tools I may want to put in it. After making a lot of adjustments, I dash on the lines that I want to keep so I know where to cut. You can see now the changes that I've made. I slashed down the center of my pattern and widened it because I decided to gather it more. I also lengthened the pattern and opted to square the bottom corners off instead of rounding it. And now to cut long straps. I measured from the front of my chest at the top of the apron down to my lower back. I added a couple of inches just to make sure I had enough. These straps will be folded in half and sewn into a long tube and then turned right side out, so they're plenty wide. And for the yoke, a double thickness. This is just as wide as the top of my chest as I want it to be finished. Here you can see the finished shape of my pocket. In the end here I decided also to add a little bit of extra to the sides. I thought it was just a bit too narrow. So I added a line of stitching along the hemline. This will help me to turn in my hem to the proper space without having to measure. So I'm just folding it down to the line of stitching along the edges that are going to be on the side of the apron and the top back. And then I'm going to turn it in one more time and press, making sure the edge of the stitching is on the back. I don't want any of that to show. I could take this now and sew it at the machine, but to help hold it down while it's cooling and make sure it lays nice and flat, I like to pin. I know that sometimes all of these extra steps of pinning and pressing and pinning and pressing seem like just a waste of time, but it really helps to give a really nice finish to your projects. So now you can see that the stitching is just pressed to the back side and it won't be shown on the front. I'll repeat that on the other side. So now I have stitched my straps into a long tube and I'm going to turn them right side out. I used to wonder how to do this. There's a lot of ways, but since this is wider, I just tuck in the end a bit, making sure I don't push it through too far so I can put a chopstick in and it gives me a little pocket to hold on to the chopstick. Turn it right side out. If it's more narrow, there are other ways to do it, but this is, to me, just the most simple way. I've stitched my pocket and left an opening for turning, but when I turn, I like to first press back the seam allowance at the opening. It helps when I turn my pocket to make sure that that edge is already nice and finished and even. And now I'm going to just press my seams. It helps the stitching lay nicely into the fabric. That is a trick I learned while quilting. So now I turn it right side out, and I need to make sure to push all the corners and edges and seams open, and I like to use a chopstick. Now the trick here is to make sure your seams are pressed nice and open so that there are no odd creases along the edges. Here you can see that I got those seams nice and smooth. I'm going to do the same thing with the straps. It is really fiddly to pinch and pull and adjust and pinch and pull and adjust. But like I said earlier, this is part of the process that makes your project stand out and look really nice and finished. After all, I am making a linen apron for gardening. It's already a bit over the top to have an apron for gardening made of linen, so I might as well spend the extra time to really do a good job. So I'm going to top stitch the top edge of my pockets, and I'm actually going to do a double row of stitching here. This helps to give it a little bit more stability, finish the edge, and just adds a nice touch to it. Time to align the pockets. I place them where I think they should go. I'm measuring down on my hip where I think I want it to be, just making some little changes here and there. Measuring from the top edges to make sure that they're the same at the side edges. Here you can see I've decided they were too close together. I remembered that I added extra room in the center to gather it, so it needed to be farther apart. And now for the yoke and the straps. Here are my two yoke pieces. I'm going to place one with right side facing up. I'll put my straps in 3/8 of an inch away from the edge where my seam allowance will be. I've just eyeballed that. I'll just make sure that I sew that distance away. And then I lay my second piece right side facing down. You can see here that I have already turned up one edge of the yoke. This is to help it to be finished after I've sewn it already. I've done that on both yoke pieces. So I'm just going to pin here and sew on two sides, one long edge, leaving the folded edge open. Ta-da! Now I'm going to trim off all those little threads and turn it right side out. Make sure to get all of those corners nice and sharp. Then I will take that to my ironing board and press all of the seams open. Once again, I love to use this chopstick to help those corners. So my yoke is finished, and I have run 2 gathering stitches along the top edge of my apron. And now I'm just going to pull and gather. I like to do 2 rows of gathering stitches because it helps it to gather a little bit more smoothly, I could say. It also gives you a little bit extra strength when pulling without the thread snapping. Depending on how I'm gathering, sometimes I will even do 3 rows if I need to do a really delicate gather. So I'm just going to pull and measure according to my yoke and pull and measure until I have the same size. Looks good. Okay, so now I'll just take the threads that I used for gathering and I will tie them in a knot on both ends of my stitching. And then I'll just smooth out all those gathers so it's nice and even. And then I open up my yoke and I pin in the apron. And I need to make sure that I don't put part of it higher than the other. It needs to be the same height all the way across. And now for the rolled hem. This is actually going to be a wider hem, so I will start by pressing up the bottom edge approximately 3/8 of an inch. I just can never seem to manage 1/4 of an inch. And now I'm going to fold it up. I think I did it about 1.5 inches. Here you'll see my trick. I leave the iron in place and quickly move along, measure the next spot, move my iron down. You can't do this on every type of fabric, but it works great here for the linen. And then I will pin that and take it to the sewing machine and sew the hem down. Oh, we're almost finished. So, the last thing, you can see that I have already hemmed the side back edges of my apron, but now I'm going to cross the straps in the back and pin them into place. So to make sure that the straps do cross, I folded back both sides of the apron. And I have eyeballed the strap placement and pin it in place, and then I'll try it on just to see if it works how I have it. I did give myself some wiggle room, some extra length in the straps if I needed to make it longer. I can always make it shorter. I'm just going to fuss with this for a minute and just check the placement of everything. And once I'm happy with it, I'm going to stitch those straps into place and it will be done. Believe it or not, it has actually been a year since I made this apron, and I have found that it is my favorite. I have worn it again and again and again. I love it. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you will join me again soon.